The storm had rolled in so quickly that I barely registered how soaked I was until the rain started stinging my face. My hoodie clung to my skin, heavy and cold, and every step I took along the shoulder of the highway felt reckless, deliberate maybe. The roar of passing cars drowned out every thought in my head, which was probably why I'd started walking there in the first place. I wasn't trying to die. Not exactly. I just didn't care what happened. Headlights cut too close to my side, horn blaring. My chest tightened, but my feet didn't stop. Then came the sudden flash of red and blue lights spinning across the wet pavement. A cruiser screeched to a halt in front of me, tires hissing. The door flew open. "Get in. Now." The voice was sharp, commanding. It sliced through the storm in a way that startled me more than the cars had. For a split second I thought about running, but the man stepped out before I could even move. Tall, broad-shouldered, uniform already darkened by the rain. He moved with certainty, closing the distance between us in a handful of strides. His hand caught my arm, firm but not painful, and suddenly I was being steered toward the open car. I should have protested, but the warmth inside hit me like a wall, thick and almost unbearable after the cold rain. My glasses fogged instantly. The door shut behind me with a heavy thud, shutting out the chaos of the storm. The officer slid in a moment later, shaking droplets from his hair before shoving the keys back into the ignition. The hum of the engine filled the silence, along with the sound of both our breathing. I sat stiff in the passenger seat, dripping water onto the floor mat, trying not to look at him. "Are you out of your mind?" he asked finally, his tone caught between anger and disbelief. I flinched at the weight of his voice. I wasn't thinking. His hands tightened on the wheel. For a second I thought he was going to lecture me, but when he turned his head, the look on his face wasn't what I expected. Not anger. Not pity. Something else. Something steadier, heavier. He studied me, not just glancing but really looking. His gaze lingered on my soaked hair, my trembling fingers, the way my chest rose and fell too quickly. It wasn't invasive, but it was searching, like he was trying to understand what had put me there in the first place. The silence stretched until I couldn't take it. "Eli," I blurted. His brow furrowed. "What?" "My name. It's Eli." He blinked once, then nodded slowly. "Daniel Ruiz. Officer Ruiz, technically. But, you can call me Daniel." His voice softened at the end. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, and in the glow of the dashboard lights, I noticed the faint shadows under his eyes, the sharpness of his cheekbones, the way his mouth pressed into a line like he was always holding something back. He had to be mid-30s, at least a decade older than me, maybe more. "You're lucky I came along," he said finally. "Or unlucky," I muttered before I could stop myself. That earned the faintest flicker of a smile, gone almost as soon as it appeared. He shook his head, glanced out the windshield where rain smeared the world into streaks of light. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, alive. I became hyper-aware of everything. The sound of his breath, the way his shoulder shifted when he adjusted in the seat, the faint scent of coffee that clung to him even through the damp uniform. I should have looked away, but I didn't. Something about him, the weight of his gaze, the unspoken patience in it, kept me there. It wasn't the way strangers looked at each other. It wasn't the way a cop looked at someone he'd just pulled out of danger. It was steadier, gentler, like he saw something in me I hadn't realized was showing. The rain hammered against the roof, the world outside a blur of storm and headlights. Inside the cruiser, though, time felt slower, like the night had folded in on itself and left only the two of us suspended in its center. And in that suspended moment, I understood something I couldn't name. The way he looked at me, not away, not past me, but right into me, made something shift in my chest. I didn't know if it was fear, relief, or something else entirely. But I knew the night wouldn't end the way it had started. The first time I ended up at his apartment, it wasn't planned. A week had passed since the highway, yet Daniel kept showing up. Not every day, just enough that I noticed. A drive here, a check in there. He always framed it casually, like he just happened to be on patrol nearby. But I wasn't naive enough to believe in that many coincidences. That Thursday evening, rain had returned with a vengeance, flooding gutters and washing the city in silver streaks. I was standing at the bus stop, soaked through, when his cruiser rolled up to the curb. He leaned across the passenger seat, window cracked just enough for his voice to cut through. "You really want to wait out here?" I hesitated, hugging my backpack tighter. Then I sighed and slid into the seat. The warmth of the car wrapped around me, and I hated how good it felt. The drive should have been short, but half the city was dark from a power outage. Streetlights blinked out one by one, until the only glow came from the cruiser's dashboard and the sweep of headlights across wet asphalt. When we reached my block, The whole street was shrouded in darkness. No lights in the windows, no hum of electricity. Just rain and shadow. He slowed to a stop, glanced at me, then at the street. "Doesn't feel safe dropping you here like this." I tried to laugh it off. "It's fine. I'll survive one blackout." But he didn't move his hand from the gear shift. His jaw tightened and I could see him weighing something. Finally he exhaled and said, "Come with me. Until it passes." I stared at him. "To your place?" "Yeah." His tone was calm, unbothered, like it was the simplest solution. "It's 5 minutes away. You'll be dry. Safer." I should have said no. A sane person probably would have. But there was something steady in his eyes, something that made me want to believe him. So I nodded. His apartment was small, functional, and neat. The kind of place someone lived alone in but kept ready for company that never really came. A faint smell of coffee lingered, blending with rain-dampened air. He tossed me a towel. "Dry off before you catch something." I obeyed, running it through my hair while he moved around the kitchen. Without asking, he made tea, strong, simple, nothing fancy. He set the mug in front of me like it was routine. Like I belonged there. Then, just as I lifted it to my lips, the lights went out. The apartment sank into sudden darkness. Outside, the storm howled, but inside there was only the sound of rain against the window and my uneven breath. I heard him strike a match. A small flame flickered, then steadied into the warm glow of a single candle. He set it on the coffee table between us. Shadows danced across his face, softening the sharpness of his jaw, deepening the lines around his eyes. For the first time, he looked less like an officer and more like a man, tired, grounded, quietly watching me over the wavering flame. "You always walk into highways?" he asked lightly, "or was that just my lucky night?" I let out a shaky laugh, staring into the candle. "Guess I wasn't thinking clearly." "Guess not," he murmured. The silence that followed pressed against my chest. I felt every inch of space between us on that couch. Or rather, the lack of it. His knee brushed mine when he shifted, and though it was the faintest touch, it rooted me to the spot. I told myself to move, to slide away and make the moment disappear. But I didn't. Neither did he. We sat there, shoulder to shoulder, two strangers who weren't really strangers anymore, the storm closing us in. His presence radiated heat, steady and impossible to ignore. At one point, he leaned forward to adjust the candle, and his arm brushed against mine. Just skin against damp fabric, but it lingered, not because he meant it to, maybe, but because I felt it long after. I pretended not to notice. He did the same. But the truth was, it wasn't nothing. Not the brush of his shoulder, not the way his eyes lingered when the silence stretched too long. Not the quiet steadiness that made my chest ache in ways I didn't understand. Too close to be nothing. That's what it was. And even though neither of us said a word, I knew he felt it too. The storm didn't last forever, but the silence between us did. When the power finally clicked back on, Daniel didn't move right away. He just sat there, staring at the candle like blowing it out would mean acknowledging something neither of us wanted to name. Eventually, he leaned forward and snuffed it with 2 fingers, plunging the room back into the cold glow of electric light. The spell broke, but not completely. After that night, I told myself things would go back to normal. He would stop checking in, I would stop expecting him to. But the opposite happened. The silences grew longer. Sometimes he'd drive me home from school without either of us saying more than a handful of words. Other times he'd sit across from me in his kitchen, sipping coffee while I picked at toast he insisted I eat, the air thick with everything we didn't talk about. It wasn't awkward silence, at least not always. It was loaded. Like there was something humming just beneath the surface, waiting for one of us to break. And then one evening it did. I had shown up at his apartment soaked again, not from rain this time, but from sweat after running to escape the tightness in my chest. He opened the door and before I could explain, his eyes flicked over me, reading everything I wasn't saying. "Come in," he said, voice softer than usual. I collapsed onto his couch, head in my hands. For a while he didn't speak. He just moved quietly around me, setting a glass of water within reach, turning on a lamp that filled the room with a low amber glow. When he finally sat down beside me, the cushion dipped. Not too close, not too far. Just enough that I felt the warmth of him there. "You okay?" he asked. It was the same question he'd asked outside my apartment that night. But this time something in his tone cracked. It wasn't a cop asking or even a neighbor. It was a man who cared, maybe more than he should. I swallowed hard. "Not really." He didn't push. Just waited, eyes steady on me. And I don't know why, but I started talking. Not about the highway, not about him. About everything else. The loneliness, the way my life felt like it was slipping sideways, how I'd been pretending to hold it together when inside it felt like I was unraveling. The words stumbled out in pieces, my throat burning with them. I expected judgment or pity, but all I got was silence. And something in that silence mattered more than any words could have. He didn't look away. Didn't fidget. Just listened, really listened, like what I was saying wasn't broken nonsense but something worth holding. At one point, when my voice cracked, I felt the couch shift. His hand hovered near mine, close enough that I could feel the heat of it. He didn't grab me, didn't push, just stayed there, giving me the choice. I didn't take it. But I didn't move away either. The air between us pulsed with everything unspoken. I could hear his breath, slow and measured, as if he was steadying not just himself but me too. When I finally stopped talking, the quiet that followed was deafening. My chest rose and felt like I'd run a marathon. His eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen before. "Eli," he said quietly, my name sounding heavier in his voice than it ever had in mine. I looked at him. Really looked. His face was tired, shadows under his eyes, stubble catching the light. But there was something else there too. Something gentle, something that told me he wasn't just carrying his own weight, he was holding mine too. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke again. But in that silence, something shifted. Not a confession. Not a touch. Just a knowing. I think we both understood then that whatever was happening between us wasn't an accident anymore. The silence had said it for us. It happened on a night when the world outside felt too heavy for me to stand in. I hadn't planned on seeing him. I hadn't even texted. But my feet carried me there anyway, down familiar streets, until I found myself standing at his apartment door. My knuckles hovered before I forced them to knock. When Daniel opened the door, he didn't look surprised. Just concerned. "You all right?" I shook my head before I could stop myself. He stepped aside without another word, letting me in. The apartment was dim, a single lamp casting soft light across the room. I dropped onto the couch, restless, my chest heaving with leftover panic I couldn't name. My hands wouldn't stay still. I rubbed them against my jeans, pressed them together, pulled them apart again. He sat across from me at first, elbows resting on his knees. He studied me the way he always did, quiet and searching. But then he moved, slowly, deliberately, and sat beside me instead. The cushion dipped. The warmth of him spread into the space between us. I tried to steady my breathing, but it caught anyway, a stuttered inhale that gave me away. He noticed. Of course he did. "Eli," he said softly. Just my name. That was all it took. My chest cracked open. I pressed my palms against my eyes, but it didn't stop the tears from slipping through. And then I felt it, his hand on mine. Not a fleeting brush this time. Not an almost touch. His hand settled firmly over mine, grounding, warm. The weight of it stilled me in a way nothing else had. I froze. My body didn't know how to react. No one had touched me like that in so long, not with gentleness, not with care. My first instinct was to pull back, retreat before it became something dangerous. But I couldn't. Because the second his skin pressed against mine, something inside me loosened. The tightness in my chest unraveled just enough for me to breathe. I lowered my hands from my face, blinking through blurred vision. He was closer than I realized, his eyes steady on mine, his expression caught between restraint and something softer. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but the world outside faded until there was only the heat of his palm, the quiet thrum of my heartbeat, and the unspoken understanding passing between us. It wasn't just a touch. It was an anchor. And when he finally pulled away, it wasn't quick. His fingers lingered, sliding from my knuckles slowly, deliberately, as if he knew I'd feel the absence long after. I wanted to say something, anything, but words tangled in my throat. So I just sat there, trembling from the storm inside me, staring at the place his hand had been. He leaned back, dragging a hand through his hair, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath too. For the first time, I saw cracks in his composure, not weakness but humanity. His chest rose and fell heavier than usual, his jaw tight with restraint. Neither of us mentioned it. Neither of us dared to. But the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It carried weight now, the kind of weight you couldn't undo. I left not long after, muttering some excuse about needing to sleep. He didn't stop me, but his eyes followed me to the door, lingering like he wanted to. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. I shoved my hands into my pockets, but I could still feel him there, the warmth, the steadiness, the unspoken promise in the way he'd held on longer than he needed to. I told myself it was nothing. Just comfort, just kindness. But deep down, I knew. That touch wasn't going anywhere. It had stayed with me the second it happened. And I had this sinking, or maybe hopeful, feeling it would stay a lot longer than either of us was ready to admit. 4 days after that night on his couch, the memory of his hand over mine haunted me. Not in a painful way, in the kind of way that kept me awake, replaying every second until I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it. He didn't bring it up. Neither did I. But the air between us was heavier than before, as if every silence now hummed with the memory of that touch. It was late on a Friday when I found myself in his car again. He'd offered me a ride home from a diner near campus. We should have gone straight there, but instead he kept driving, the city lights fading into quieter streets. I didn't ask where we were going. I just let him. Eventually he parked near the river where the water glimmered under the street lamps. The hum of the engine quieted. The only sounds left were the lapping of water and the faint rattle of wind. We sat there both staring straight ahead. My fingers fidgeted in my lap. His hands stayed on the wheel though we weren't moving anymore. I couldn't take it. Why do you keep checking on me? He turned his head, his brow furrowing. Because you need it. That's not an answer. His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he wouldn't say more. But then his grip loosened on the wheel and his voice dropped low. Because I want to. The words hung there, heavy, impossible to ignore. My chest tightened. I forced myself to look at him, and when I did, his eyes were already on me. Daniel, my voice faltered. This doesn't feel like nothing. The air shifted between us like I'd broken some unspoken rule. He leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. His gaze didn't waver, but I could see the battle in his expression. The part of him that wanted to stay quiet and the part that couldn't anymore. No, he said finally, his voice rough. It doesn't. Silence rushed back in louder than before. My heart pounded so hard I thought he might hear it. I didn't know what to do with my hands, my body, my breath. So I whispered the only thing that came to me, what if this is real? His eyes softened just barely but enough. He didn't answer right away. Instead he reached across the space between us. His hand hovered near mine, not quite touching, just waiting. This time I didn't hesitate. I let my hand fall into his. The warmth that spread through me wasn't like before. It wasn't a fleeting shock. It was steady, certain, undeniable. He squeezed once, grounding me, and then turned fully toward me. His face was close now, closer than it had ever been. I could see the flecks of tired gold in his dark eyes, the stubble shadowing his jaw, the faint crease between his brows that never seemed to leave him. I thought he might kiss me. For a second I wanted him to. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward until his forehead pressed gently against mine. The contact was soft, almost reverent. I closed my eyes. Our breaths mingled in the quiet car, uneven and unsteady. That small, fragile space between us felt like the most intimate place I'd ever been. We stayed like that, not speaking, not moving, for what felt like forever. When he finally pulled back, there was no dramatic declaration. Just the quiet echo of what we both already knew. This isn't nothing, he whispered. And I believed him. The night at the river should have scared me. The press of his forehead against mine, the way his hand closed around mine like it had always been meant to, it should have sent me running. But instead, it was the first night in months that I slept without waking in a panic. After that, we didn't need to talk about what it meant. We didn't label it. We didn't confess. We just stayed. Sometimes it was in small ways. Him showing up at my bus stop without saying he'd be there. Me finding excuses to linger in his apartment longer than I needed to. Our silences weren't heavy anymore. They were comfortable. Sacred even. One evening I ended up cooking at his place. His fridge was embarrassingly bare, but I managed to throw something together with pasta and canned tomatoes. He leaned against the counter, watching me like he wasn't even pretending not to. "You always this domestic?" he asked, his mouth quirking at the corner. I rolled my eyes. "You're welcome for saving you from another night of takeout." He chuckled, a low sound rare and rough but warm enough that it made something settle in my chest. We ate on the couch, knees brushing, sharing from the same bowl because he only had one clean fork. When he stole the last bite, I swatted his shoulder. He caught my wrist easily, his hand wrapping around it, holding it just long enough for me to feel the weight of it. Then he let go like it was the most natural thing in the world. Another night, I fell asleep there by accident. I hadn't meant to. I just sat down after dinner, the warmth of the room and the steady sound of his voice lulling me into something softer than exhaustion. When I blinked awake, the blanket had been pulled over me, and the lamp had been switched off. I turned my head and saw him in the armchair across the room, half dozing, keeping watch like he couldn't let himself fully rest while I was there. "Why didn't you wake me?" I whispered. He stirred, blinking at me. His voice was rough with sleep. "Didn't want to." Something about the simplicity of it made my throat tighten. It was moments like that, quiet, ordinary but heavy with something unspoken, that filled the spaces between us. One Saturday we ended up sitting on his balcony as the city stretched beneath us. It was late, the skyline dotted with lights, the air cool enough that I pulled my knees to my chest. He sat beside me sipping a beer, his arm brushing mine every so often. We didn't say much. He told me a story about his first year on the force, about how he'd once locked his keys inside his own cruiser. I laughed harder than the story deserved, mostly because of the way his eyes crinkled when he told it. When my laughter faded, I glanced at him. He was already looking at me. The air shifted. Not tense, not heavy. Just full. And before I could think too much, I leaned my head against his shoulder. For a second, I worried he'd stiffen, pull away, remind me of the lines we weren't supposed to cross. But he didn't. He stayed still, steady, and then I felt him exhale, slow, deep, like he'd been holding it for years. His shoulder was warm, solid, grounding. I closed my eyes and let myself sink into it. We stayed like that for a long time. No words, no explanations. Just two people sitting together in the quiet hum of the city night, the closeness speaking louder than anything we could have said. At one point, his hand drifted over mine, resting gently, not even holding, just touching. I didn't move. Neither did he. And it hit me then, this was what I had been waiting for without even knowing it. Not the rush of adrenaline, not the storm of confusion. Just this. A closeness so soft it felt almost fragile, like if we spoke too loud it might disappear. But it didn't. It stayed. And for the first time, I let myself believe it might keep staying. Ebbed in slowly, like the world was hesitant to wake. I blinked against the pale light filtering through the curtains. For a second, I didn't know where I was. Then I turned my head and saw the familiar lines of Daniel's apartment. The stack of books on the shelf, the chipped mug on the counter, the jacket draped neatly over the chair. And him. He was still asleep in the armchair across from the couch where I lay, his head tilted slightly, his arms folded over his chest. His uniform jacket was gone, replaced by a plain t-shirt that softened him in a way I wasn't used to seeing. His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. I lay there longer than I should have, just watching. There was something about the sight of him at rest, not carrying the weight of the world, not braced against it, that made my chest ache. Eventually I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around me. The floor creaked faintly under my feet, and his eyes opened almost instantly, alert even in half-sleep. "You're up," he murmured, his voice rough with morning. "Didn't mean to wake you." He stretched slightly, grimacing at the stiffness in his neck. "You didn't." We fell into a silence that wasn't heavy anymore. Just soft, like the early light that filled the room. "I could make coffee," I offered, though I'd never touched his machine before. He smiled faintly. "Knock yourself out. Middle cabinet, beans are in the tin." The simple domesticity of it startled me, how natural it felt to move into his kitchen, to find mugs, to grind beans while he leaned against the doorway watching me. No uniforms, no storm, no tension. Just two people making coffee in the quiet of morning. When I handed him a mug, his fingers brushed mine. It wasn't deliberate, but neither of us moved too quickly to break it. Our eyes caught over the steam. "Thanks," he said softly. We sat at the small table, sipping in silence. The city outside was beginning to stir, the faint hum of traffic, the call of a street vendor, life pushing forward like it always did. I traced the rim of my mug, heart thudding with words I hadn't planned to say. "Daniel?" He hummed in response, eyes steady on me. I swallowed. "What are we doing?" For a long moment he didn't answer. He set his mug down, rubbed a hand over his jaw, exhaled like the question had been living in his chest too. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know it doesn't feel wrong." The simplicity of it broke something in me. I felt tears sting my eyes, though I blinked them back quickly. "I'm scared," I whispered. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine just like it had that night on the couch. His grip was steady, grounding. "So am I," he said. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." I looked down at our hands, the way his fingers dwarfed mine, the warmth seeping into my skin. Slowly, carefully, I turned my palm upward and threaded my fingers through his. The air shifted. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just sure. We stayed like that, hands joined, silence stretching, until the city outside grew brighter. Eventually he stood, tugging me gently to my feet. "Come on," he said. "Sun's up." We stepped out onto the balcony. The skyline glowed with the first light of dawn, streaks of gold breaking through the gray. The air was cool, fresh, carrying the scent of rain from the night before. I leaned against the railing and he stood beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. Neither of us spoke for a while. We didn't need to. The quiet was enough. The warmth of him beside me was enough. Finally he said, "I don't know where this goes. I can't promise it'll be simple." I turned my head, meeting his eyes. "I'm not asking for simple." Something flickered there, relief maybe, or gratitude. He nodded once and we both turned back to the sunrise. The light washed over the city, over us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. I thought back to the night on the highway, the storm, the chaos, the moment he pulled me into that cruiser. I never expected it to lead here, to coffee mugs and quiet mornings, to touches that stayed, to silence that spoke louder than words. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it. But I wouldn't undo it for anything. Whatever this becomes, I thought, watching the sun climb higher, I'll take it.